So just a quick note about this video and this project. I had to basically teach myself how to take this apart and put it back together. I couldn't find a guide online, and I made a few mistakes along the way, even while filming the video. So I would recommend watching through it all the way first, so you can see there were just a couple times where I said something and I had to go back and correct myself. So it would save you a little bit of time and headache rather than working along with the video, to watch it in its entirety first, so that you know where those couple spots are and you don't run into the same mistake that I did. So without further ado, here we go. All right, new project. So today we're going to be talking about what I believe is the most complicated cup holder ever designed and put into an automobile. And that is this style cup holder out of my 2003 Porsche 911. And I started to count the parts. I counted no less than 10 different springs inside of here. So many different parts. It's an extremely complicated device. There's a lot of little intricacies that you don't even notice until you take it apart. For one, this faceplate here actually has to slide out of the way when it opens, so it doesn't hit this spot right here in your dashboard. So if you look closely, when it's opening, it actually slides out of the way, and then when it's closing, it slides back so it's even across the front, which is really pretty remarkable. The problem is the little gear that drives that is weak, and it broke on my cup holder. It's broken on other people's cup holders. In addition to that, all these moving parts here have a tendency to break. You can see mine right here is cracked. So I am taking it apart and actually 3D printing replacement parts. I've 3D printed the gear. This is actually version 1 of that little gear. I have version 2 in here right now and I'm testing it. And I decided it'd be a good time to make a quick video explaining how to take this apart and put it back together, because it took me a while. There aren't a lot of reference photos online of where everything goes, and as you take it apart, pieces go everywhere, and then you kind of have to figure out how to put them back together. There were some really helpful people in the forums that posted a few pictures, but it didn't include everything. So now that I have it back together, and I'm pretty confident I know how it goes back together, I'm going to take the time to show you how to actually open it up properly and then reassemble it properly, because there's an easy way and a hard way to reassemble it. I've done it both ways. I can assure you the easy way is much better. I have been blessed with basically unlimited patience. So I'm going to warn you ahead of time that this project, taking this thing apart and putting it back together, is going to test your patience. It can be frustrating at times. It requires some just patience and going slow and not rushing it, because there are a lot of little parts inside of this cup holder, as you're going to see. So tool-wise for this project, you really don't need a lot. You need a T8 bit, preferably in some kind of a screwdriver. The screws on the top are actually pretty tight. And I would recommend safety glasses, although the way I'm going to show you to put this back together, you shouldn't need them, but I did have the spring pop off a few times and throw projectiles around the room, doing it what I would refer to as the hard way. And then a little baggie for your parts and your screws, because there's going to be a lot of them. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to take this apart as well as put it back together. And then I'm also going to link other videos, one about how to actually remove it from the car, because to take this out, you have to take off the horseshoe, you have to take your radio out and the center air vent. And then I'm going to probably post a third video specifically about how I recreated this part in Fusion 360 and then the process of kind of 3D printing it. So if you're interested in those, click the links. I'm going to include links to, I guess, a T8 bit in the description. And feel free to post comments if you have any questions. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to take it apart now. All right, I'm going to do my best to show you everything. I'm trying to get a similar angle to what you would be seeing as you take it apart. We will see how successful I am, though. So the first thing that you want to do is get your T8 bit, and you want to remove these silver screws around the top of the cup holder. So there's 2, 4, 6, there's 8 of them. So we're just going to go ahead and take these out. And as I said before, mine were pretty tight to begin with, so yours probably will be as well. If you do set this down on your table, I would set it top side down because there's some like grease on the other side here. I'd also recommend just protecting your work surface or putting something down to avoid scratching it. Now that it's opened up, you basically have three main components. You have this centerpiece, and this has all of the moving parts in it. You have this piece here, and this is basically just like a long tooth gear that provides resistance to this little gear here, and that gives it kind of a linear motion and some resistance so it doesn't pop out quickly at first because of all the tension on the spring. And then you have the tray that everything sits in. So before you lift this piece out of the tray, you need to take the tension off the spring, and you also have to remove this piece here. So the first thing that we're going to do is remove the tension from the spring. And to do that, we need to remove this little cap here, and this is just sitting on there, so it should be easy to take off. It just pulls straight up. And if you look at it, it's just like a little retaining clip for the spring. We're going to set that aside. And now we're going to put pressure here in the middle and open the cup holder. So the same way you normally would, push it back and then let it slide open. And once it's in the fully open position, you've kind of detensioned the spring as much as you can. And now it's time to actually take the, unhook the spring to remove all the tension. This is your spring right here. And I'll try to turn it so you can get a better view, but basically it's on a little metal post. So what you want to do is kind of like push on this down and push this piece that way, and at the same time lift it up, and it'll get caught up here just a little bit, so you want to kind of like work it out. Yeah, that's tricky. So it does have a good amount of tension on it, so there we go. It's more of a this direction push on the spring to take the tension off, that you can see it kind of slid down, and now I'm able to slide it up, and I want to take it up past that little groove there. So now the spring is free, and you've relieved all the tension on the assembly. That is a big trick. That's a key. Doing that first makes your life a lot easier. So next up, we want to remove this piece here, and to do that we have to actually remove 2 screws from the back side of this assembly. So we're going to flip it over. And when you flip it over, you want to be careful to support this so it doesn't kind of like fall out as you're working on it. So I'm just holding it kind of in the center, flipping the whole assembly over, and then setting it down while at the same time trying to support that and keep that spring from getting in the way. Oh, there we go. So it did try to pop out a little bit there, but I caught it. You could probably tape it. Honestly, that might be a better idea if you really wanted to be careful. So now the 2 screws that I mentioned are here and here. They're 2 silver screws, also T8s. All of the screws I've encountered so far on this have been T8s. So I'll take that out, take that one out. Okay. So now there's really nothing holding this piece in. So we want to flip it over just as carefully as we flipped it over the first time. So I'm actually going to slide my entire workspace toward the edge of the table so I can get a grip on it before I actually lift it. Maybe. Don't knock off. In fact, I'm going to take this opportunity to put all of my screws in the Ziploc bag before I knock them all on the floor. Edge, make sure you grab the whole thing, and then we can flip it back over. You'll notice this piece gets left behind, which is fine. We're going to go ahead and set that aside. That's the piece we just removed. Okay. And we're going to set it back down like this so that you can see it. All right. Now we're getting somewhere. So to remove this piece, there's actually a little tab right here that when it's in the fully open position, it kind of prevents it from lifting out. So we want to close it just a little bit, nice and easy. And then we can lift the entire thing straight up and out, and it comes out all in one nice piece. So you're left with this piece, which is kind of the outer shell for the bottom. Set that aside as well. And this is what we want to work on here. So to take this apart further, we actually flip it over. And there are several little black screws. So there's one here, 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 and here that we need to remove. So that's, oh, I apologize. I don't think we need to take that one out. So we need to take out 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 little black screws. Now I'm going to hold it together and then flip the whole thing over just to get the screws out. Turn it back. I like to keep it oriented so it's like it was facing me in the car. And now we can separate the two halves. So the first half comes up and kind of start at the back left corner. So I was wrong. We'll put it back down. This 5th screw does need to come out. Kind of break the two halves. Now there's a little tab here, so you kind of like have to lift and then slide it to the right at the same time in order to get the two halves separated. Okay, I am striking out left and right today, so I forgot one more screw. There's a sixth black screw right here in this little nook. There we go. 6th screw is out, now it will come apart. So again, hold it together, flip it over, oops, and then lift in the back left corner, and then kind of slide to your right, and it'll come off. All right, top half is off, you can set that aside, and now you're left with the whole assembly. And as you can see, my spring popped out. And that was happening because it was just kind of resting on this little peg there. So you can set your spring aside as well. Now, take note of kind of where everything's at. There's a chance things might have popped out of place while you were doing that. But I will show you kind of where everything goes when we reassemble it as well. But you just want to generally be kind of careful with all this stuff. There's a lot of little parts. And like I said, a lot of springs. So at this point, you have it taken far enough apart to replace that little gear that I mentioned. As you can see, here's my little 3D printed one attached to the original kind of arm that actuates it. And these gears mesh up with this kind of like toothed assembly on the inside or on the back side of this faceplate. So that when you're actually, let's get it lined up, so that when you're, and this is just ridiculous that I've never seen anything like this. So when you're opening it, this actually rotates like that to slide this piece left and right. So entirely overcomplicated, but kind of cool at the same time. This piece slides out like this. Oops, kind of went past the, and there's actually a little arm that locks the cup holder in place. So that's why you're able to slide this in without the whole assembly closing, because until this goes all the way back and hits that arm right here, that arm actually actuates this little retaining clip. So that's like that, and then the arm, so then that allows the whole thing to actually slide back in. So there's a lot of really cool little mechanisms in here. You've got like this little detent thing that's spring loaded, keeps pressure on it as it slides in and out. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this cup holder. So if you need to open up this section, like to replace these crack pieces, you just slide this out like that, set this aside, and there's like a little arm here that always comes off. Don't lose that, it's very important. You can set that whole assembly to the side, and then you have this piece by itself. And this piece is held together by more of those little black screws. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more little black screws here. And I'm not gonna lie, I have not taken this piece apart yet. So this is unknown territory for me. We're just gonna go ahead and give it a shot because I need to get that piece off so I can measure it and make a replacement. It already is trying to come apart as I'm taking these screws off. Just FYI, there's pressure from the springs inside of it.
So this whole thing may explode in a second. Last one.
Okay, now that all the screws are loose, I'm gonna do my best to take this off very slowly. Okay. The final stage here, if you're disassembling this completely and you're trying to replace maybe one of these little plastic pieces because these have a tendency to crack, which mine did, is to actually disassemble this piece here. So you need to take this pin out to separate the two pieces. And the pin only comes out one way. And the way to determine which way it comes out is to look at the side here. And if you look very closely, you will see there's a little like bump out on one side, and there is not, oops, there is not on the other side. So that little bump out, which is over here on this piece, is actually, it's kind of like a little retaining area, and the pin gets wider on this end. It has little grooves or teeth that kind of press fit into here. So in order to take it out, it has to come out that way. So that's the only direction it will slide out. So in order to do that, you can either grab it with a set of needle nose pliers and try to kind of like work it back and forth and slide it out that way. Or the easiest way that I've found was to just get a screwdriver with kind of a sharper tip and press straight down on this side to pop it out. However, because it's hanging on here with those little grooves or teeth, it's gonna have a tendency to flex this arm out as you're pressing down. So you wanna find a way to stabilize this arm. And the way that I did that was I set it on the side of my vise so that it was supporting like right here, but this was open. So then I could apply pressure from the top end and it popped out really actually quite easily. So this one is already partially removed just for demonstration purposes, but basically you want to work it out, and you can see that there's the toothed kind of barbed end, and then as you're sliding it out, I like to put a little bit of pressure on the spring to take the pressure off the pin, and then you can take the pin out and you've got your two separate pieces and your spring. And keep these springs safe because I'm not aware of a source to replace them, and they're very small and easy to lose. So now you've taken the entire thing apart, and we're going to go into putting it all back together again. All right, so the first step of reassembling your cup holder is going to be to reconnect these two pieces that we just took apart. In this case, this piece is actually one that I modeled and printed off my 3D printer because I needed a replacement. The original one broke, but it's identical to the original. So it's important to note the orientation of these. You'll notice on the inside one there is that little kind of bump out area. So we know that's the side we want the pin to start on. And once you do that, fit these together. And then you'll want to get the pin started. Start with the smooth end of the pin through that bumped out section. Get the holes lined up, there we go. And just get it started, but don't put it in too far because the next step is to put the spring on. So there are 4 springs associated with these two assemblies. 2 of the springs have a little kind of like bend or a notch in them. These are the ones that go on the back side here on the longer peg. So we'll set that aside for now because you don't need that until you're putting it back into the housing. And the other 2 are shaped differently. I guess that has a little notch too, but it's not a 90 degree off to the side These two are parallel. So as far as I can tell, these two types of springs from kind of the front unit and the rear unit are the same. So getting them mixed up doesn't seem to make any difference. However, the spring is asymmetrical. It has a long end and a short end. The long end faces to the inside of the cup holder. So basically an easy way to remember that is the long end is going to go on the thicker or the wider of the two pieces. So it's going to be oriented like this when you put it together. Now I haven't really found a great way to do this, but the best way that I've found to do it is to get it started at an angle and then slide the spring in as you're kind of pressing down. And this is going to be kind of hard with the camera right in my face, but I'm going to do my best to let you guys see what I'm doing and get it on tape. So let's see. I'm going to kind of like lean it back like this so that short end is in the proper position on the little panel, and then kind of like twist it, get that long end started on that tab, and then I can kind of push it flat, slide the pin in through the spring. There we go, I got it through all the way through the spring. Now that the spring is in place, both edges are where they should be. Just kind of, again, push down on the spring a little bit to take some of the tension off, and then work it up into the next set of holes. And at that point, it is all the way in. It's not fully seated, and you want your spring, the little legs on the spring, to be on the inside of these tabs. So you can see there's these little tabs here. The spring's on the inside there, and then on the other side, there's a corresponding tab for the spring. It's kind of hard to see, but it's there, and you kind of like work the spring back and forth, make sure it's seated and resting properly. And then you just want to kind of push that in, press it in to fully seat it. And at that point, you should have smooth movement. You should feel tension from the spring. If you don't have tension kind of springing it back into place, then the spring's not quite right and you need to redo it. But at that point, this piece is reassembled and ready to go back into this assembly. So we're going to go ahead and do the second one, or I guess the inside one you might call it. So the other one goes together the exact same way, however the parts are slightly different. So this one goes on the outside of the cup holder, so the one closest to you. And then there's that second one that I'm going to call the inside one that when you pull out the cup holder, it's the one furthest from you. So it is important. Let's talk about these parts for a second because I've got them right here. So the inside one actually has a significantly larger diameter than the outside one. So if you're in the car, let's say, you pop the cup holder out, this is the first one you see. This is what I'm calling the outside one. And then you slide it out and there's the inside one. This one has a significantly larger overall diameter. Might not be obvious here, but trust me, it is. I've measured. So the outside one, the first one that you see, takes these two parts and they are smaller than the inside one's versions. So if you get them mixed up, it's not a big deal because you can easily tell them apart. You can see how much bigger this one is than that one. And then the same applies to this one. They're both significantly larger. So the two larger pieces go together and they go on the inside here, whereas the two thinner, smaller pieces go together and they go on what I'm calling the outside. Okay, now that you have your two little flapper paddles reassembled properly with the pins and the springs in place, it is time to put them back into this assembly, which I'm not gonna lie, it's a little bit tricky. I have not done it with both at the same time yet, but we're gonna see how that works. So I would recommend laying both parts out, having these pieces already in place on the top half, having them oriented so that you can quickly kind of put them together. get a couple of screws ready. They're the little black screws, so that once you get it together, you can hold it. You need to insert these little rubber bumpers first, so don't forget those. Those go in these little slots right here and here. Okay, they just kind of sit in there. Once those are in place, make sure you have your orientation correct. So again, the smaller one goes, in this case, on the right, but it's to the outside of the cup holder. The larger one goes on the left, which is the inside of the cup holder. We're looking at things from the bottom right now. And then the springs that actually add tension to these, mine are different, and I'm not sure if it's because mine, it might just be that one of mine is snapped off and broken, but one is longer than the other. So I've experimented with it both ways, and I found that the longer one works best on the outside, or our right in this case, and the shorter one works best on the inside cup holder or left. So just bear that in mind. If you do see that yours are different, try that configuration. If yours are the same, then don't worry about it. So the first thing that we want to do is put the springs on. They go on the long peg with this little kind of curved 90-degree bend to the inside. And that comes on here, and then it actually clips over this arm, and there's like a little notch for it. However, it doesn't really like to fit in that notch. So I'm not sure if it's just a poor design on Porsche's part, or maybe the springs just lost some of its shape over time, but mine does not really fit in that notch, so it's just kind of over that arm. And we'll just set this one in place. And actually, that one, honestly, that one just fit in there just fine without having to pre-tension it at all. So we're just gonna leave that there, although just swap these really quick and see if it makes a difference. No, it makes no difference. So I'm not sure why it won't go in that notch. It does on the front one. So we're just gonna go ahead and set that in there. So it's actually gonna be a lot easier than I thought because of that. Make sure the little rubber bumpers don't fall out. And we're gonna do the same thing on this side. So put it on, and this is actually my 3D printed version of this piece because my original one snapped. And with this one, I made the arms slightly wider just to add some strength. So you kind of have to pull it out and snap it over. And as you can see with the part I designed, it does fit in the notch quite nicely. So go ahead and put this in place. Now with this one, this is going to put tension on the spring. So the trick to this is to kind of pull this piece up towards you, or that's what you want to happen. You can kind of fit it down in this slot, back a little ways from where it goes, and push it down and bring it forward. So it kind of pulls that piece down and back. So it's laying in the slot, and now there's tension on it. So you have to hold down on it while you're putting this together. So while I'm holding down with one hand, I'm going to get the next piece with my left hand, bring it over, and this gets a little tricky because pieces want to fall out, but kind of reach through while you're keeping tension on that. See if we can get that piece back into place, maybe. And then just kind of work it together. There we go. I think we're getting somewhere. Oh, our little rubber peg fell out. Make sure those stay in place. Got this little rubber, there we go. We're good, so everything kind of snaps down and fits nicely. We check all 4 arms, we check these things, make sure that they're in place, they appear to be. Check these little rubber things, make sure they haven't popped out, and it doesn't look Doesn't look like they have. So while you're keeping tension or pressure here, I'm just gonna go ahead and drop this screw in. Tighten it down, but don't over tighten because you're just going into plastic. You don't want to strip these out. And then I'm going to double check and test that everything moves freely before I put the rest of them in. Okay, so it's all tightened down. Seam looks good. These look like they are sitting flush, like they should be. They go down like they should. Yeah, everything's moving freely. These pieces swing up like they should, so I think we're good to go. So I'm just gonna put the rest of the little black screws in. There are 3 more. All right, so this assembly is back together and we're ready to move on to the next step. All right, so now we're really starting to put some things back together. A couple things to note on this piece, if you did happen to take it apart further, you've got this little arm here, and this just has a spring that kind of like goes over a little peg here, and then it's got a little pivot point that goes into a hole right there. So if you need to put that back together, that is how it goes. There's a little like a roller here, corresponding roller on this side, and this one actually gets tensioned by a little arm. So this little arm fits on a little metal peg here, and then it has a pin with a spring on it that attaches there. So the idea is that it keeps pressure on this and allows it to kind of click in and out. That is it for this part. So this piece actually fits down into the lower tray via this hole here on this pin. So put that there and set it down in there. Next up, we are going to reinstall the little gear that slides the faceplate left and right and the corresponding arm. So this is the gear that I actually modeled and printed to replace my broken one. If yours isn't broken, it'll look very similar but slightly different. I made mine thicker just because I don't want it to break again. And then you have a little arm here. Now the orientation of this arm, if you look closely at it, it has a little W or a crown. I don't know what that is. It looks like a crown. On it, this side faces up and goes to the right. So basically, put your little gear, the little peg on it, into the right-hand hole, like that. And then the actual arm goes on this peg over here on the left. That's part of the lower tray assembly. And then this hole on your gear goes right onto this peg here. And you might have to kind of actuate it out to get it lined up and get everything, get everything seated properly. There we go. And once you have it on there, when you open and close this, you see it actuates your gear left and right, which is exactly what you want. Now we can put this assembly back in. So it goes right side up, so the cup holders are facing up. And I usually slide it, get that old gear out of the way, slide it from the end, onto these rollers. You might need to push down on them as you slide it in, just in case they want to pop up. Get in there like that. You can see this little arm popped out, so we just want to slide that around to find the pin. And in order to get it seated, you may need to push up on this end a little bit and kind of wiggle it around. Oops. It can be a little tricky. There we go. And it pops in there, and this really doesn't stay put very well until the top half of the unit is on. So, oh, another interesting note. So this assembly actually has, and I'm going to go ahead and take this out because this is important. It has a little pin in the back right corner of it. This goes into this groove back here. So once you slide it in, and we'll do this again. This guy is kind of popped off, so we want to try to keep him in place. There we go. Push down on that this time. You have to lift it up and then set it down into this groove, and then everything should seat nicely. There we go. And it should open and close nicely. You should be seeing this gear actuate as you open and close it. Everything should be nice and smooth. So next up is going to be the actual arm that kind of locks it in the closed position, the open position. It looks like this. It has a little metal tip on it, and then a little indentation here that goes into this hole. So once you get it seated in that hole, turn it around, put that metal tip into this slot that runs back and forth there, and that is how this goes. So as you test this, that's going to have a tendency to pop out, so just keep an eye on it because you want to put it back in before everything gets fully reassembled. Okay, so now we're getting to the fun part. We'll want to put the spring in place just for the time being before we kind of close up the top of the assembly. And it goes in this orientation. So the arm coming off the left should be on top, and the coil should be on the opposite side of you. So it fits in there like that on this peg here. And that's all we need to do with it for the moment. So again, we want to make sure that this pin is where we want it. This is sitting in this groove. This little arm is seated properly. We've got everything seated properly over here with this gear, as well as this little kind of tensioner. And next up, we want to actually put the top assembly with the faceplate on. So I found the best way to do this is with it in the fully open position. So you kind of open it up like you would, and that's going to give you kind of a reference point for this faceplate because the faceplate slides back and forth as it opens and closes. So in the fully open position, it is going to be all the way up to the very edge of like the wide area starts. So the kind of knockout area where it fits out is right up there, and we want this tab to be right up to that edge there. So putting this back together, there's kind of a little tab here at the front that you need to get over this little corner. There's like a little notch in it right there. So I start from that end. Again, kind of just give everything a once over, make sure it's seated properly. Everything looks good here. So kind of tilt it down and get that notch started. There we go. And then it kind of needs to come down. And once you start to get everything lined up, there's really no trick I know of here. It's just a matter of patience. You got to close it just a little bit to get it to fully seat. And as you do that, try sliding this faceplate just slightly inward until the gears mesh up and it starts to come down. Let's see. Oh, there it went. And again, don't force anything. You shouldn't have to force anything. It's just a matter of getting everything just right. And that little tab popped out there. Okay. Come on. Is that all seated? It feels pretty good. I'm not sure if we're quite, there we go. There, it's seated. Seated nicely, and while holding it together, you can try actuating it. Make sure that it seems to move smoothly. Of course, the spring is kind of hanging out there, and that's going to start getting in the way on the closed end of things. But that seems to be working properly. So next up, we are going to flip it over and put the screws in to hold this piece on. So I don't need to tell you at this point, but you want to be careful. Hold everything together tightly as you flip it over. And then find a way to put it back down on the table so that you can get the support. Turn it so you can see what's going on here. You can get the support underneath before you have to take your hands off of it, which I've done here. All right. And we need to reinstall 3 screws, here, and over here to kind of clamp this assembly together. Okay, so one of the things I just realized is once you do have these 2 halves together, you can actually lift it out of this lower tray to make it easier to work on. I would say it is good practice to reassemble it in that lower tray just to make sure that you have this piece oriented properly, your little arm tensioner oriented properly, the spring oriented properly, and this arm for moving the faceplate back and forth in the proper orientation, but it is not required. So once we kind of have a couple of the screws in place, we can take it out, we can flip it over, and we can put the rest of the screws in. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 black screws that go in the underside of this piece. I'm gonna go ahead and reinstall them. Okay, so those are reinstalled, and I believe that is it for the black screws. So you shouldn't have any black screws left at this point. So next up is going to be to get this this gear kind of tooth piece reinstalled. In order to do that, we're going to bring the lower tray back down, and we're going to set this piece back into it. So a few things we want to line up are this pivot point, this little arm. Not worried about the spring yet. And then this tab here on the back side goes in this groove over here, and then this arm, as we've discussed, goes in this arc here. So we'll start at the lower left. And because of the spring, we've got to kind of do this with the cup holder more in the open position. But not all the way open, because there is a little tab on the right side that'll prevent you from doing that. This fits down into there, and then this guy like that. So we've got all 4 of those points in place. Next up is to position this, and this goes over here on the right side, generally kind of like this. So it's going to mate up with this gear, and it's going to go kind of the flat end is going to go toward this back edge. Now the trick about this is we have to put the screws in from the bottom, so we have to flip the whole thing over again, and we have to do it while we're holding not only this tray that we just put in, but also the tooth piece as best we can. And again, it's kind of tricky. The tooth piece isn't as critical. Is once you get it flipped over, you can kind of reposition it, and you're going to have to find the holes. So I found one of them there. We're going to get a silver screw now and put this one in. And again, this is one of the, well, pretty much all these you're tightening into plastic, so do not over tighten them. And I'm going to leave that one loose for this just a moment while I get this next piece lined up. So I'm probably gonna have to lift it just a little bit. Well, that didn't work at all. Okay, let's see. I'll flip the whole thing back over and make sure I'm still connected everywhere that I want to be connected. Oh, this one came out. Okay, everything else looks good. So this needs to come, yeah, generally like that. And let's see. I might be able to hold it like this. Yeah, now that I've got it this far along, I can hold it in my hand, drop that screw in there. Let's see if we can get it started. So, and just snug it. Again, we're not over tightening it, just making sure they're snug. All right, the tooth piece is now in place, which will kind of help retain this, but I wouldn't trust it, I'd still hold it. And now basically everything is back together except for the spring and the upper cover. So at this point, you should be able to see smooth movement on everything. And it's time to tension the spring. And this is where I would have recommended wearing safety glasses earlier, but I was doing it before I installed this initially and the spring was popping off and going flying. Now I don't believe the spring can pop off, so you should be good, but if you want to put them on, now's the time. So the spring's gonna be easiest to tension when the cup holder is in the fully open position. So we're gonna go ahead and open it up all the way. Making sure everything functions properly. And this end of the spring, I'm going to see if I can get a little bit of a tighter, more of a, it's a little better. So this end of the spring goes on this little peg here, and it's not going to want to because it's going to be pre-tensioned quite a bit. So the trick, not necessarily the trick, but the only way that I've found to do it is to push this way on the end and then pull down and maybe this way a little bit on this side and just kind of brute force it. And it is hard to do with the camera in place, so I'm going to try to get a different angle. So not only do you have to push this under here, but this little end actually has to go in a little further to get under this lip before it'll go over that little peg. So once you have the spring on there, there's a little retaining cap that goes on in place, and it goes on with the fat side down, just like this. So a little bit later in the video, you may notice I have it the other way. It's because I made a mistake when I put it back together initially. So flat side goes down, just to clarify, just like that. We need to prepare to put the top on. So before we do that, at this point it's pretty, it's tensioned, so you want to kind of handle with care, as that spring will pop back up if you give it a chance. These little metal tabs need to go in before you put the top on. They go in with the little kinked facing the rear. So this little tab goes in this slot, and then it sets down and there's a hole there that corresponds with the hole in the metal tab. Same thing over here. And then the final piece is the top piece, and if you're not sure which is the top and which is the bottom, the top has a little sticker, at least on mine, but the other telltale sign is the bottom. You should see some wear marks from the mechanism moving. So that will set down right like that. And get all the holes lined up, and then start putting in the silver screws. Okay, so once you get the silver screws in on the top, and I should note these I do believe go into metal, so you can tighten these down a little bit more. I wouldn't go crazy, but you should be able to tighten them a little bit more than the ones that go into plastic. Once it is all back together, it should look like this. You should be able to slide it shut and it'll kind of lock in place, and then it should pop out freely. This should slide out freely. All these parts should move as expected, slide back in properly, close up properly. Everything should be moving smoothly. If you do run into a situation where it'll close, but then it doesn't, it just kind of jams right before it closes all the way and won't latch, check this corner here. You can kind of see the little seam there where the two pieces come together. Make sure it's nice and smooth. That's the little tab I mentioned earlier that is on the piece that the faceplate is connected to. It needs to kind of slot in and lock into place. I made a mistake earlier where it wasn't fully seated, and that prevented it from closing properly. So make sure that's closed properly if you have any trouble closing the unit. But other than that, you should be good to go. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. I am going to test these 3D printed parts that I made in my car in 90-degree weather for a few weeks and make sure that everything works the way I expect it to, make sure they don't break or anything like that. Assuming that all goes well, which I'm expecting it to, I probably will start selling the parts kit that I made. So if you're interested in that, shoot me a message or post in the comments and I'll get you the details about it. Thanks. Please like, comment, and subscribe if this video helped you out.